I like to say that you have the fact that like you're sitting in front of me, but I will, if a client is telling me she is worried and she's anxious and she can't do something, I'm going to look at her and say, you've made it through 100% of your bad days. You're still here. And the fact that you're still here and in front of me tells me that you have got some skills. You've made it. There's no reason to think then that you're not going to make it in the future. I always said the tragedy in something is if we get through something and we've learned nothing from it.
Welcome to Friends in the Corner podcast, stories and topics from around Kentucky. I'm your host, Dan, coming to you from beautiful Lexington, Kentucky, after what's been what feels like 40 days and 40 nights of rain. But hey, it's like the great Luke Bryant said, rain makes corn, corn makes whiskey, and I'll let you guys finish the rest of those lyrics on your own time. But we're excited to bring you guys another episode of Friends in the Corner podcast, and if you haven't heard the news yet this week, we've added a few new listening platforms for you guys to enjoy us on. Yeah, you know that you can find Friends in the Corner podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. But as of this week, we've added on a few more. Now you can find us on Amazon Music and Audible. Yep, we keep adding new places for you to listen to, and if you want to keep up to date with everything happening with the show, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FITC Podcast. But we're excited to bring you guys another episode of Friends in the Corner podcast as we welcome in today's guest, Sheryl Woolverton of How to Make a Life. Sheryl is a certified social worker and life coach who founded her own program, How to Make a Life. Sheryl in today's episode talks to us about her journey into becoming a social worker and her transition into life coaching. She talks to us about her program, How to Make a Life, which has podcasts, blogs, and other content that help to support women and other individuals with their own self-care. Sheryl even takes some time to talk to us about the importance of self-care and the things we can do in our daily lives to improve on it as well. Very fun and insightful episode that we're excited to share with you guys today. If you want to learn more about Sheryl and her work after today's episode, be sure to find her online at www.howtomakealife.com. Follow on her Instagram at howtomakealife, and be sure to find her on Facebook at How to Make a Life Health and Life Coaching. But I say, without further ado, let's get right into it here. Ladies and gentlemen, from How to Make a Life, Sheryl Woolverton. Going to be getting our lives in order, I guess you could say, for this episode of the show, as we're going to be welcoming in Sheryl Woolverton of How to Make a Life. Sheryl, how are you doing tonight?
I am great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for coming on here. It's really awesome to kind of finally make this happen after back and forth emails trying to make it a plan and make a date for this.
Right. It takes time, but we eventually get things scheduled.
And I like to tell my listeners a little bit about how I've come to know my guest and all that fun stuff. So Sheryl, I actually know Sheryl a little bit through her husband, James Woolverton, from my time over at Castle and Key. James is a distiller out there when I was a tour guide. And I would see Sheryl come around to the distillery every once in a while. I know I met you once out there. James introduced me. Mm-hmm. And then ever since then, kept in touch with James on social media where he would share his wife's post and talk about her program, How to Make a Life, and how I was working to make people's lives better. And I always thought, hey, that's going to be a great interview one day. So and finally was able to get Sheryl onto the show.
And here I am.
Yeah.
And I love that about social media. That's the great thing, is that people know you stay connected with people through other people via social media. That's the great thing about social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's great to have you on here and honor your husband too. I'm drinking a little Castle and Key gin tonight.
Yay,
so,
very good.
Yeah, keeping him employed there. But Sheryl, this episode's about you, and we're going to talk a lot about your program, How to Make a Life. We're going to talk about your background as a life coach and a social worker here. But just to start off with the hardest hitting question I can ask you, who you are and where you're from.
Well, I am Sheryl Woolverton, and I am a life coach and licensed clinical social worker. I am from here in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm born here and raised around Central Kentucky. If you're Southern, though, you're always from wherever you're born. So I am a Lexington girl.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Very cool. And you're a licensed social worker, and
Mhm.
you're a life coach here. So can you kind of talk to us about
Mhm.
that? What is it that got you into social work?
Okay, well, it's a little bit of a long story. I'll try to give you the abbreviated version. I always tell people the fact that I am doing what I am doing um, is this was the universe's plan, not mine, uh, because I am not a traditional social worker, as my husband will tell you, and that's not any offense to what we would think of as a normal social worker. Um, my father died when I was 10 years old in an accident. So I was used to grief and have been around the world of grief since a very young age. And I've always felt called to help others who had had a loss or who had things that were going on in their life. I was fortunate enough to come from a family that had the financial means, had support, and I knew that there were people in the world who just didn't. And my plan in life was actually going to be a physician or a physician's assistant. That didn't work out, and as I tell people, quite frankly, I was tired of school and I wanted to graduate. And I looked at all my hours and what I had, and I was able to go and complete a social work program um, pretty quickly. And that's kind of how I got into the world of social work. It was not what I'd planned, And one thing led to another when I got my master's degree at the University of Louisville. And
Oh, all right. I won't hold that against you, but
don't hold it against me. I am, my blood does bleed blue, but
hey,
I
okay.
am a very, 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 very proud cardinal. I have to tell people that because it's an excellent program. I've taught at the University of Kentucky's College of Social Work, so I'm still connected. But yeah, I'm proud of my U of L background.
Okay. All right.
But I
All
came
right.
back to Lexington. Remember, I came back to Lexington.
All right. Well,
But
good.
when I once again, I'd never planned when I went to graduate school. Then I was going to, I thought, well, I'll get my master's. I'm going to work in policy and development. I'm going to be an executive director of an agency. I had no desire to do clinical work, no desire to do counseling. That wasn't what I was going to do. Um, I interviewed at Hospice of the Bluegrass 3 times. They offered me a job 2 times, and I turned them down both times. And by the time they offered me a third one, I thought I better take this one because they might not offer me another job again. And Hospice of the Bluegrass is now Bluegrass Care Navigators. I've worked there for over 13 years as a grief counselor. And as I said, I really wanted to be a grief counselor because I felt that it was called. Grief is not something that we like to talk about. And that I wanted to be that guide and that support system to people who had lost a loved one. And I was there for, as I said, about 13 years. I've done some palliative work. I had my license in clinical social work, so I can independently practice. When I left there, I didn't necessarily think I was going to do counseling on my own, but everything kind of fell into place. And I have found by the work that I did as a grief counselor, and I know there's a question you'll ask me later. All right, and I can go ahead and answer it. That one of the reasons that my coaching practice is called How to Make a Life is so many of my clients come to me and would come to me and say, how do I do this? Tell me, how do I grieve properly? Or, they were seeking that, as I say, a how-to manual.
Mm,
And I think as humans, we all love how-to books, right? We
right. Yeah.
want we want the steps.
I,
And
I got 5 or 6 of them up here. So,
yeah,
yeah.
right. And so that's the hardest thing, is that I had to tell people there's not a book. I can't give you a how to grieve because each of us is unique, and each of us, as I say, everybody has their own fingerprints. So everyone's going to grieve a little bit differently. And I can give you a range, but I can't, and the thing is, if I were to give you, let's just say I gave you a list and said, okay, if you do this and you do all these steps, then you have done it correctly. What if you don't need to do steps, I don't know, 3 through 7? What if you don't need it? Then people would start saying, you'd say, well, oh, there's something wrong with me.
Mm,
I don't need to do that. And that's kind of how it all kind of started. I realized I was doing a lot of coaching. I would help people through their grief, and then what I was doing was helping them rebuild their life.
That's,
That's where that comes from.
I mean, that's a kind of an amazing testimony to hear of kind of your journey into the social work, how it wasn't really planned, but it kind of fell into place, which is great. One thing I thought that was kind of interesting, we'll kind of unpack what you just said there in a few different ways, but your time with hospice, I mean, that had to be something really challenging, because were you working with the patients or the families, or working with both?
I was working with both.
Yeah.
And I also did some palliative care work with people who have chronic illnesses or things of that nature. So overall, my years of working in hospice and palliative care is about a little over 15 years. And for me, it was not that difficult. To say that certainly there were difficult times. But I often found it a privilege, and I still look at it as a privilege to be able to walk with people, whether it be someone who has a terminal illness and is dying, or it's someone who has lost their spouse, their mother, their child. Holding space and being present for somebody is really, it's a gift. And so I did kind of look at it in that I'm not going to take away, it was hard. There were, after a while it does get hard, and you have to practice a whole lot of self-care.
Yeah.
And not everybody can do that work. I know that even back in the day when I was working there, sometimes new nurses would come on thinking they could do the work. And then after they go through orientation, they'd be like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And it's not for everybody.
Yeah. Well, God bless you for, having that strength to do that. And not in that same way, but I know, like, in my past, like, I've worked with individuals with certain care needs, and after a while, it just kind of drained you and it challenged you a lot. And it was work I realized after a while, I'm not fit to do that, but God bless the people who are, because it can be a lot to try to be that positive energy when there's a lot of, when they feel like there's a lot of negative energy there.
Right. It takes a lot, like I said, a lot of self-care and being aware of what your needs are and what your energy level is. And I really do. I have watched people be caregivers. I have been a caregiver myself. And I honestly do believe that caregiving is the most difficult act that anybody can do, to caregive for somebody that you love.
So after your time there is when you started moving into kind of independent counseling, would you say, is that what you're doing now, independent counseling?
Well, I do independent counseling. I am slowly moving away from being a counselor and doing more life coaching.
Okay.
So I started off, it was, once again, something kind of fell into my lap. I am one of those blessed human beings that, like, sometimes what I've been looking for doesn't happen, but then this great gift is given to me. And that's how I came upon doing a private practice. And I do love it, but I am a coach at heart, and there's a difference between counseling and coaching.
That's what I was going to ask you, if we could dig into that for a minute. What's the difference between counseling and being a counselor and being a life coach?
To be as simplified as possible is that counseling really does look backwards a lot. I'm dealing with something in my past that has created this issue, and I need to work through that. I'm stuck there, or because of this issue in my life, I need to work through it and move forward. Coaching is truly more of looking forward. I've got these goals. I know I'm not really happy where I'm at, and I need that help to get where I'm going. Now, counseling, there is often a lot of coaching in counseling. And as I said, I'm a coach by nature, so a lot of my clients probably realize this. They're getting some really good coaching from a counseling, and that's when I started realizing, wait, I'm doing more coaching here. And I hate to say, it's just, there's more freedom in coaching.
Well, and so that's when you decided to transition into this independent life coaching direction here. So what was it that finally made you say, hey, I know you mentioned you were getting all these questions like, how do I make my life work after all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff? But what
Mm-hmm.
was it that made you say, you know what, maybe I can transition to this. Maybe I can build a, I guess for lack of a better word, brand around this process.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that there was one specific thing. And if I can, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit more in regards to just my coaching practice and the name.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in 2013, which is when I left hospice, and I left hospice because both my mother and my grandmother died within about 5 months of each other. And I knew at that point I could not do the work I was doing and then grieve myself. So I was fortunate if I could leave there. But I started blogging initially, and my blog was called How to Make a Life. And my purpose there was I'm going to blog about my grief from a grief counselor's position. And I think even then I knew that maybe someday I was going to make a life coaching business out of this. That was why I kind of chose that name. And so that's always been that little like grain of sand that's been there. And I think I held myself back from going into life coaching just because of my own doubt. I tell people, we all have our own doubts, and I don't think I can do this. And I think it was just finally, the pressure of like, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. It was just there. Does that make sense?
No, yeah,
It does. Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, it was a kind of a leap of faith, but all the pieces were coming together to say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And so you started off with blogging, and then
Mm-hmm.
and I know you also run a podcast through How I Make a
Mm-hmm.
Life. So can you talk us a little bit about that? How did that division of your program kind of get started?
Um, as I said, it started off as a blogger and blogging, and I think the last time I've really done any serious blogging was like 2018, 2019. And I loved blogging. I'm a writer by nature, so I found it very therapeutic to write. But then I think, as you and I've talked, time wise, you just get to a crunch where sometimes you just can't do everything you want to do.
Oh yeah.
I am a podcast junkie by heart, and I love podcasts. And I said for years, honestly, oh, I'm going to do a podcast someday. I'm going to do a podcast someday. And I think I finally just got sick and tired of hearing myself say it. And in 2020, probably late 2019, I just started like, just get the information, learn what you need to do. Let's just try this. And I I launched my first episode in March of 2020. As I said, I think it was recorded before the world shut down with the pandemic. Um, and my podcast, what I do with my podcast is a lot of it comes from sessions with my clients. I find themes that are very universal. They're also universal for me. And I think that it's something that we all need to talk about. So those are where the content of my podcast usually comes from. It's like, um, often you'll say, does everybody during the week have the same issue, or am I looking for a theme with my clients? And I think it's a little bit of both, but I often find a running theme. And I really think it's important that we just all recognize we're all very much more similar than we are different.
And I've gotten to listen to a few of the episodes, kind of preparing for this interview. And I know
Mm-hmm.
some of the things, and when you were starting it, you were talking about hitting was. Sorry, I had in my notes here. I'm a
It's
very
okay.
prepared. I'm a very prepared
It's
host
okay.
today. But like career change, health concerns, relationship issues, in which you've kind of tackled in some really like deep ways on your show, and you kind of relate to like, hey, I know what it's like because I've been there before, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
huge. A lot of people want to know like, how do you move past something, and
Mm-hmm.
to kind of like use examples is really powerful, I think, in those
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Right. And I think that that's it. How do I do something? Once again, going back, how do I do this, Sheryl? How do I do it? And I look at what I'm doing with my clients is I'm helping them. We're looking at their toolbox of life. Everybody has one, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. And we're hoping there's more healthy tools in that box than unhealthy. And sometimes it just takes me helping a client to realize you've already got the tools. We just have to learn how to use them differently. I think that's one of those things. We're not being brought up. It's not like somebody says, and this is how you cope.
Yeah, yeah.
We're not given that exact
Just do it.
example. Just do it, and we have models of our parents, or we see friends, and we do live in a society where people do a lot of avoidance. And that's, once again, so then when they're faced with something, it's, how do I do this? How do I figure this out? And I try to give people permission to know that it's okay that we don't really know maybe at first, and that we can figure it out. I like to say that you have the fact that, like, you're sitting in front of me, but if a client is telling me she is worried and she's anxious and she can't do something, I'm going to look at her and say, you've made it through 100% of your bad days. You're still here. And the fact that you're still here and in front of me tells me that you have got some skills. You've made it. There's no reason to think then that you're not going to make it in the future. I always said the tragedy in something is if we get through something and we've learned nothing from it.
Well, and it's powerful the way you kind of share like that part of it, because a lot of people, and I know, like, I'll just to be transparent with you, I've had to do counseling, and I've had to do my own fair share of kind of inward looking, I guess, to say to myself. And that's been always something that's been popped up is like, you're still here, you're still fighting. And that's at the end of that's something good that you can do. And it's helped out a lot. So
right.
Bravo to you. I know you said you were a podcast junkie, and that's kind of helped what got you into this too. So from podcaster to podcaster, what's some of your favorite podcasts that you listen to?
Well, I'm a personal development junkie too, but actually, Primal Potential by Elizabeth Benton. She is, I believe, in Massachusetts. I love Susan Hyatt. She is a business coach, business/life coach. She's out of Evansville, Indiana. I'd listen to a quote of the day quote by Sean Craxton. Absolutely, they're usually short. He's using snippets of other people, but I find that so motivational sometimes just to listen to those. There's a couple of just like health podcasts. I have a list of, when you pull up your Apple podcast, and I just kind of like, who am I going to listen to? They're the ones that I know on Sundays or Mondays. I'm listening to Susan Hyatt, and then I know when they come out. I try not to. Sometimes I do try to listen to myself, but
no, I feel that. I do too. I was gonna say now Friends in the Corners join your list, I'm hoping. So
yes, I did. I've listened to them. So
oh, did you? Oh,
yes.
Well, good.
Oh yeah,
good. That makes my heart happy. So
good.
But so we've been talking here about your brand, how to make a life. We've been talking about your life coaching style, how you've been helping clients, and how you've been using your content to kind of help people through difficult times. And as you were mentioning, when you launched your podcast was in March of 2020, right when the whole world shut down. And the last year has kind of been incredibly challenging for a lot of people. I just share a transparent example for you. I kind of mentioned it online. So I lost my job last year, right before I got married. And that was pretty challenging. So a lot of people now, where it seems like the pandemic has come to an end for the most part, and things are kind of getting back to normal, I think there's probably this period where people are trying to figure out, like, well, how do I move on from what I just came from? So what thoughts or what kind of advice would you give for people that are kind of coming out of a post-pandemic, I guess, depression, I guess is a word to say?
Well, and I think that what we need to be prepared for is that we're, from a mental health perspective, we're beginning to expect maybe a second or third round of just mental health crisis and issues that are coming out. And people are anxious. They've been depressed. They were anxious last year. They were depressed last year. They didn't know how they felt last year. And there is a struggle now in regards to, do I want to go back to the way that things were? things are not going to be the way they were. How do I, and once again, how do I do this? And really what I'm focusing on is helping a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients, honestly, last year opened their eyes and made them realize they needed to make changes. The world either forced to change, or they slowed down enough to realize I don't like the way that I'm living. And so that's just perpetuated maybe, all right, which direction do I want to head? And I often will help. What I'm doing now is helping them really evaluate where they're at. And I think that's what we have to stop and do. We have to do some evaluation of, where am I right now? What are my needs? And that can be, of course, I mean, there are still people who are looking for jobs, or they're struggling. I've got some clients who are struggling with, they loved working from home. They worked from home well. They would take walks at lunchtime. And I had a client yesterday, she said, I was making these elaborate lunches. I can't make these elaborate lunches and go to work, to my actual office building. And so, I mean, I think that that's been a struggle too, of you want to see people, but you want to maintain some of your good habits that you've developed. And so I think that's it. There's a lot of struggle, and I encourage people to slow down. I mean, you really need to go with this slow. And that's my concern, is I think so many people might be rushing back to whatever else is out there. And the rushing back then is going to be eventually like a wall of what am I doing here?
Right.
And so I think we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just speak from kind of my own experience. Was, last year when I lost my job, my first thing was, well, I got to get another one. I got to get it now. And, it was 6 months of being unemployed, but the whole time I was really hitting the ground and trying to do all this stuff. And obviously people weren't hiring because of the pandemic. And eventually it wore on me because of the season. And even my wife, she was telling me, you need to just take a breath, think things through, and kind of work through it from there. And I agree. It's maybe for some, maybe it leans both ways. There's some people who maybe got a little too comfortable with this, but then there's other people that maybe I need to get back to normal now. And it's a marathon, not a race, I guess, or not is a nice way.
Not a sprint. Yeah.
Not a sprint. Yeah. That's what I was going for. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, we can't go back to normal. To say that we go back to normal is to act as if 2020 never happened.
Right.
And every one of us has changed in some form. I'm an extrovert by nature. I love people. I'm somebody who I can have some alone time, but I'm someone before the pandemic. If my husband James was working, say on the weekend or something, and I didn't have plans with a friend, I could stay at home for a while. And then I'm somebody who would go out just to a store just to be around the energy of other people. Now, what I've learned I had no choice, is that I can spend a lot more alone time and be okay with it than I ever thought I could. And I myself have found, I see counseling clients still one day in person. And I was really hesitant, not because I was afraid of going back to see people, but I had developed this nice, comfortable routine. And it's I don't know. I'm afraid if I go back to that, then it's going to be like a snowball and you start everything again. So it's going slow is the most important thing. Taking a breath, and your wife's right. Just take it slow.
She'll be happy to hear that. She likes to let me know.
You can let her know that.
Yeah.
You've only been married a year and she's already, right?
Yeah. We have a good compromise. She says what she wants and I say what I want. And then we come to a conclusion and she gets what she wants. So I've learned.
Start to this marriage. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you, as we've kind of been talking here about how you kind of coach your clients and the importance of, looking into yourself and working on that self-care. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about why self-care is so important to people, and what steps can we take to kind of work on our self-care like even daily?
Okay. So self-care. I have been a self-care advocate before it became like a very niche-y hip thing
Mm.
to talk about, because self-care, I realized when in my days of working as a grief counselor, we really got to care for, I had to care for myself as a counselor, but then teaching my clients, what do you need? I think even people are often surprised. I will provide a self-care assessment to
Mm.
people, and they are often surprised at some of the things that are on this self-care list. Like, do you eat regular meals? Are you sleeping, 8 hours a night? Do you make time for your friends? Do you go to all of your regular doctor's appointments? I mean, some of these are very basic, everyday. Do you stretch? Do you take a walk during the day? Self care, I like to say, is should become a habit. We need different variations, but if we can create what I call like micro habits of that, it just becomes commonplace that when you get up from your desk, you're going to stretch. You're going to stretch your body. Um, or that you're going to, every day you take a walk somewhere, that you make sure that you're eating however many meals are best for you during the day, that you're becoming aware of it's so important that we take care of these small things. If we're doing those every day, we're less likely then to fall off a cliff, of like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. So I always tell people, what are the things you're going to do daily? What are the things that you do like weekly? Like for me, every Sunday night, I take a detox bath. That's just my ritual of Sunday. It's kind of a way of, I'm either ending my weekend or I'm starting the week. It's that little point for me. It's self-care, and a lot of it can be ritual wise. But I also make time every Sunday. Sunday's kind of I guess could be a self-care day for me, but every Sunday, my best friend and I walk every Sunday, and it's my time with her. It's a physical exercise, but it's like she's my soul sister, and I know that that time is just there. James and I have a regular date night once a week, and sometimes it's just at home. But I mean, so these are things that I encourage people. What are those regular things you can put into your life? Now, then sometimes you need to really do some massive self care, and that's going to vary from person to person. And it may be that you really have to take time off of work to rest. And rest is a whole nother topic that I talk to people about, because we rest isn't always just sleep. There's a lot of different ways of rest in our life. But it's not always just a bubble bath or going to a spa or getting a massage. And I think that's, we talk about self-care so much, but we don't necessarily do it.
Mm.
So think about daily. What do you need to do?
Well, I'm gonna go get a Zen bubble bath going here after this interview. How's that?
Hey, it's good. And that's it. Like, if you're somebody who likes aromatherapy, or do you wear clothes that you like to wear? I mean, I know you work at a bank. You probably don't. I don't know if you have to have a uniform, but I have a lot of clients who like work in places where they have to wear uniforms and they don't like it. I worked part-time at a hospital for a while in palliative care, and part of it was you can't wear open-toed shoes when you're in a hospital, if you're a hospital employee. Well, first of all, do you know how hard it is to find really cute closed-toed shoes? It ain't easy.
Yeah.
No, you probably
No,
don't.
no,
But I mean, but that was important to me, and it's what I tell people. So it's like, it's like, are you happy with what you're wearing? Do you enjoy what you wear every day? Are you listening to music that you love? So many different ways of self-care.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Sheryl, and just thank you for sharing all of your wisdom through your show, How to Make a Life. And, one thing I will say, and we kind of joked about this in the emails kind of leading up here, is so Sheryl's main audience that she's approaching, her main clientele she's working with is women. Obviously, I am not a woman. But I even so, like, your content has been, I think, helpful for anybody that's been going through some challenging times. So I'm glad to find stuff that's universal in that way, and in those
Right.
different regards.
Right. And it really is. Everything that I discuss is very universal. I think I chose to make my practice primarily with women, most simply because I am a woman.
Mm.
And I just have this real desire to help every woman to see how powerful and wonderful and amazing that she is. But you're right. I mean, as male, female, we are all dealing with many of the same things. And I think that we all can. I mean, I listen to a lot of things that men, from male podcasts or things like that, and it makes sense. It doesn't necessarily, but my choice was, I enjoyed counseling men when I, was at hospice, but it's kind of like when you pick your niche of like where do I really feel called, and it's to help, basically most of my clients are women, maybe early 30s too. I've had women in their 60s and 70s.
Mm.
They're in those transition times of life, trying to figure out what to do.
Well, and I like to know, Sheryl, too, as we're starting to wind down here, with your program, with the podcast, and with your coaching, where are you kind of hoping to take it from here? Like, where are you hoping for it to grow? Do you have any visions for what you're wanting to do with it? But what's the future of How to Make a Life look like?
My goal is to completely do health and life coaching. I will no longer do any type of counseling whatsoever. And I would love to develop more online programming, online groups for women. I have been doing some workshops actually here in town in person, but connecting more and building my coaching practice from a group programming perspective, but then also just individually, having those ongoing clients.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Well, we're hoping for the best. Everyone should definitely check out How to Make a Life. Check it out, the podcast, check out the website. But Sheryl, just to kind of get people going here, where can my listeners find your content? Where can they find you? If any women out there are seeking counseling, how could they get connected with you?
Well, if they're seeking coaching.
Coaching. I'm sorry. I said the proverbial sin.
No. I mean, but I think it's but if you're looking at, you're somebody who is going through a transition in life and you're not sure and you're just trying to figure things out, you can find me. My website is at howtomakealife.com. I do a lot of work on Instagram. It's at How to Make a Life. I'm on Facebook at How to Make a Life Health and Life Coaching. And of course, my podcast is the How to Make a Life podcast. And you can get that on most podcasting platforms.
Awesome. Well, Sheryl, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing some of your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it. And we're excited to see where things go from here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad I could be here.